Hello, everybody out there in Twitch land. Carlos A.S. Lising, and this is caslTawk, our very first episode. Um, with me tonight is Allan Grohe, one of my dearest friends in the Greyhawk community. Allan, welcome to caslTawk, our very first episode.
Greetings.
Greetings. Just so everybody knows what we're doing here tonight, caslTawk is going to be part of the arm of Casl Entertainment, where I actually get a chance to talk about the game. Most of the time, you guys are seeing me on Twitch, and I'm gaming with some of my patrons, and it's really a lot of fun. But we don't really get a chance to talk too much about really the nuts and bolts of the game and some of the lore and things like that. And so with that, the Casl Entertainment Patreon for this month is about demons and the Witch Queen Iggwilv. So with that said, I couldn't think of anybody better to have with me than Allan Grohe, who is a huge enthusiast of Iggwilv and has a great footing in the history of the game. Allan, could you tell us, our viewers who don't know you very well, a little bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. My name's Allan Grohe, as Carlos said, and I have been a longtime fan in the Greyhawk setting. Iggwilv Iggwilv and Sajkanth and that entire adventure are probably one of my favorite areas inside first edition gaming. And the adventure did so much wonderful stuff to pull together and introduce, new demons into the game, and it gave us the history of Iggwilv, and it goes back before that to the old tournament from '76 and stuff. But it was very captivating for me, and I can never really stop waxing on about it.
Yeah, actually, I was stunned to see the other day when we were talking about favorite modules that yours was actually G3, because I know what a huge enthusiast of S4 you are, and
Yeah.
that's my favorite module of all time is S4. I
Yeah.
remember as a child when I first opened it, how blown away I was by all the new material.
Oh, agreed. S4 is phenomenal on so many levels, but I think what I really like about G3 is it packs the biggest punch of Gary's old school adventures, and you get the Drow in there for the first time and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, you get a lot of G3 is a very strong contender, especially with Brasmal and things like that in there. And
Yeah.
obviously you get some of the Obmies in there. You get some of the greatest Greyhawk villains and personages of all time actually make their appearance or make an appearance in G3. But going back to the Demons and Devils thing, I wanted to talk to you a little bit. First of all, let's do a little bit of background over here. For those of you who aren't aware, the Casl Entertainment module that's coming up this month is entitled "When Comes the Witching Hour." There's a copy of the cover of it. Patrons this month or in October, will be receiving "When Comes Witching Hour" before anybody else has a chance to. It's a module that takes place in northern Perenland, and it involves Iggwilv and many demons. It's in one of her old haunts. It's my ode to S4, my love letter to S4, and to the character Iggwilv in general. And as some of you know, it actually uses Black Blade Publishing produces a book called Osric, and that's a system that we use for it. That way that we can respect IP and we can still have a 1E feel. Allan, could you tell us a little bit about Black Blade Publishing and Osric for those out there who don't know anything about it?
Oh, sure. Black Blade was founded by my partner, John Hirschberger, and I 10 years ago this year. And we founded the company in order to really publish high quality gaming products kind of in general, and with a particular emphasis on well-made physical books. So the Osric rules were the first retro clone published in the old school community, designed to really recreate and emulate the AD&D first edition rules, and to give you a very true, good entry point into that rule set, because it was at the time, and this goes back to 2006 or 7. The rules were out of print and had been for years. Prices were just going up and up on them, and there wasn't a really good accessible way to play first edition AD&D. So when we designed Ostrich, there was a large group of folks from Dragon's Foot and from Knights and Knaves, which are online websites and forums, where we all got together and said, hey, let's make this happen. So Black Blade, when we founded the company, we did work initially with Matt Finch and Swords and Wizardry for a while, and then shifted over to Ostrich in about 2011 or so, and that's when we published the really high-end version that we have available. So the book is printed. It's not on a standard pod type printer. It's got a very high-end digital press, and we use very good quality paper and stuff. I don't have a copy of it right at hand.
Oh, I do.
Oh, okay. If you have the Lulu version compared to the Black Blade version, and you hold them up sort of side by side, the Black Blade version is about another 3/4 of an inch thick, given the quality of the paper we used and the backing boards and stuff like that. And then we added other stuff to it too to round it out. So we put in some additional artwork that's not in the standard Lulu version. Jason Zavoda of the Index Greyhawkiana fame indexed the book for us. And it was a fun project to do. So we that's been our mainstay focus for publishing, to try to continue to keep the 1E spirit alive.
And if we want to, if my viewers wanted to purchase any Black Blade material, where can they go to get them?
Oh, your best place to do that is to go out to our Facebook page. We used to have a website, and maybe we'll get it back someday, but it's kind of completely or mostly dead, if not undead at this point. So it's just out on Facebook. You can search for Black Blade Publishing, and we're very easy to find that way.
You can also get a chance to see Black Blade Publishing at shows like GaryCon and North Texas around America as well, if you want to get a chance to meet Allan and perhaps get a chance to talk to him, because he's got, as I mentioned before, he's a wealth of information about the game, its history, and particularly about the world of Greyhawk. A little bit about what Casl Entertainment is doing before we actually launch into the conversation about Demons and Doubt and the Witch Queen today. Casl Entertainment is going to be going to GrogCon in Florida here at the beginning of the month in October, where we will be doing a module entitled The Porcelain Sword of Queen Ashala. For those of you who don't know about it, there is a porcelain sword of Queen Ashala right there. It was named by my good friend Gaetano, who is in the chat room with us right now. Hello, Gaetano. He won the contest to name the adventure. It takes place in the Beclunish West. It's the first one I've ever done in the Beclunish areas. I don't think that area gets enough love from the fandom, so I wanted to do a little bit with that. I'm running 3 sessions of it live. Afterwards, I'm going to be going to Gamehole Con over in Madison, Wisconsin, where I'm going to be running 3 adventures there. One is entitled The Sanguine Labyrinth. One is entitled From His Cold Dead Hands. And the final one is entitled, all of a sudden I'm drawing a quick blank. I've written so many modules in the last few days, I'm drawing a blank totally. The other one is called The Forgotten Library of Ranette. And in respectively going backwards, Sanguine Labyrinth is otherwise the Dungeon of Bleeding Walls in the lands in the Barren Wastes in World of Greyhawk. From His Cold Dead Hands takes place up in the Thilronian Peninsula, which is the Barbarian lands. And finally, Forgotten Library of Ranette takes place in the Yeomanry, which is deals with the apocryphal goddess Ranette, who is a Sul goddess that was murdered by Pyremius, and her portfolio was taken. Finally, I will be going to GaryCon in March, and I'll be running 3 more adventures. And I don't want to eat too much into our time, but just so everyone knows, I'll be releasing all those adventures at those points in time, and you guys get a chance to play them. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So, Allan, let's talk a little bit about Demons and the Witch Queen of Perrinland.
Sure.
The first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce the whole topic of demons. They've been portrayed in a lot of different ways, depending on the edition that you're playing, the game edition you're playing. In first edition, when Gary first released the game, he kind of set the paradigm for demons and how they would be portrayed throughout throughout gaming history. It's also when he released Iggwilv, as we mentioned before, in S4. In second edition, they because of the Satanic Panic, they made a couple changes. You know, the demons became known as Tanari. They released a bunch of new different demons, and it was kind of a weird time for demons in the game D&D, and I think it turned a lot of people off when D&D kind of capitulated to interest groups to water down demons,
Oh
and
yeah. I remember Jim Ward's editorial in Dragon saying that they were removing assassins and
yeah.
half orcs and monks and demons, and I was just like, what?
Exactly. And I think it felt like a little bit of a betrayal, Alan, to me, because I know that some of us in the hobby had, we'd taken a lot of flack for the game and, the whole satanic panic, we were and I know myself, I felt a little bit let down that I felt like D&D didn't have my back a little bit when they went and made those changes. How did you perceive it?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I thought it was completely changing the entire game to capitulate to an audience that was never going to be interested in the game anyway.
Right.
So I really stepped away from D&D for much of the late 80s, early 90s. As I was going into college, that's when I really started playing a lot of other games like Cthulhu, Paranoia, stuff like that. So,
Right. At
yeah.
3.5, when it came out, they released some entire source books for demons like Hordes of the Abyss, and they released new types of demons like the ancient Ur demons, the Oberith, and the Lumara, which are immaterial demons. But Alan, what I'd like to ask you is, what did you, as a first edition player and a DM, is there anything that you have found in the later takes on demons throughout D&D in the third edition and second edition that you would like to keep or you would like to introduce or that you use in your own home campaign from these later editions?
So I'm not as conversant with the most recent editions of the game, but I did play quite a bit of 3.0 and 3.5 in the early 2000s. Um, and I definitely felt like they spent some good time and effort to kind of build out the demon lords, I guess, giving them sort of more like deity-like portfolios.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a series of articles around the Demonomicon in Dragon that also gave a lot more detail to the cults of the demons. So you could actually put them into play in a little bit more maybe like a Warhammer kind of approach to the figures compared to the way they were much less defined as religious figures in first edition.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
thought that was pretty interesting and fun way to be able to, expand on them and then, give you some more ideas about how to leverage them in your games.
Now, what you just said actually gives me there's an interesting thought there. In time, what we have seen in the history of D&D, we have all these cults, and they were end up worshiping demons or whatever, Demogorgon or Orcus, what have you. Um, and they end up getting spells from them. They end up getting powers from beyond. Does this imply that we should be treating demon lords as minor deities, intermediate? Where are their place in the hierarchy of the divine, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's always been kind of hard, I thought, to kind
Uh
of
huh.
thread the needle on for D&D because when they came out with deities and demigods and they said, only clerics, only gods of greater god status could grant seventh level spells
Right.
and stuff like that. It really changed the dynamic of what you could theoretically do with the demons if you're following that rule set and using it,
Hmm.
as fully as written there. Um, they really made demons into the equivalent of lesser gods at the time. Lolth was a lesser god inside deities and demigods, and then they kind of extended that out to be all the rest of the demon lords, archdevils, that kind of thing.
Gaetano just
So
in our chat brought up demi devils. I think that. Please go ahead,
um,
Alan.
no, that's fine. So I think it making it so codified, I think, changes some of the dynamic of a more traditional kind of Howard approach to demons or a Clark Ashton Smith approach to demons, where they're unknowable, they're strange. Any demon could be a demon prince, or it might be just a least little demon, and how would you know the difference? It could cart your soul away to the abyss or wherever it wants to take you if you blow it, no matter what. So.
Now you also played in the third edition though, where the treatment was much different, and everything was it was almost as if it was fair game for any of the demon lords to grant spells as whatever they wanted to do. So
Exactly.
it's sort of like a dichotomy there, and I think that I don't know that there's a great answer to that, which is why I brought it up. It's I think every in your particular home game, how do you do it?
So I let demons and other similar figures grant spells across the board.
Okay.
I don't limit it by the power of the god or the power of the demon, as the case may be. Um, but uh, but I do, third edition kind of let you also have characters who would be devoted to a philosophical cause or things like that. One of the guys uh, who I used to play with in college kind of made fun of it at the time. He said, "Oh, I'm gonna, like worship, spinach or something, so and get spells from that, so I don't go quite that far by any means,
I think that's
but
kind of a flying spaghetti monster sort of
yeah.
thing.
So I like the flexibility of just kind of it not being so codified and being able to kind of do anything you want with it. And I want, my high level demon lords to have powerful servants that are going to be good challenges for characters. If I'm
Right.
only limited to, poor Yuz, I mean, he couldn't grant anybody higher than a fifth level spell.
And yet at
Uh,
the same time, if you look at Helga's spell list,
yeah,
where we,
exactly.
yeah, you can't really justify the two things together. It's
Yeah, yeah. And so obviously TSR wasn't following it either. So
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting. And for my point, I do the same as you do, Alan. My thought process is as follows. I think that even a lesser god is so beyond mortal ken and is such a high powered individual that they should have the ability. Seventh level spells to them for a cleric should be nothing. Um, and I don't have any problem. I think hero deities, quasi deities, that's a little bit different. But I put the demon lords on the level of the lesser gods, which means
yeah,
everything is fair game for them. That's
yeah. So good.
no, that's always been my policy as well. So I think we're kind of in the same idea there.
Yeah, are you familiar with the old Wizards of the Coast supplements, the Primal Order?
I am, yeah.
So I like the concepts in there, which briefly, for folks who may not be familiar with them, they create this sort of additional substrate or superstrate layer of magic called primal magic, which
Right.
is what powers divine creatures' magic, and it's what separates a mortal from a really powerful mortal from even the least of the gods. So I have a lot of interest in that subject too, and I think that's a fun way to kind of tap into some ways to make gods different from mortals in general. So in some cases, some of my homebrew versions of how I kind of manage demons and stuff, some of the first generation, second generation demon lords have access to primal power.
That yeah, I think that that's an awesome approach to it. I think it's something we share in our two games. Now, talking about the world of Greyhawk in specific and the way that demons fit in there. I mean, we know historically that demons have had a huge place in the world of Greyhawk, all the way from Ayuz and Zugdemoy, going down throughout the years. Um, and particularly with the end of the Greyhawk Wars, when Canon Hazen used the Crook of Rao to instigate the flight of fiends and throw them all out of the Flanaess. What do you feel like the place of demons is in the world of Greyhawk, and specifically, how do they fit in particular, and how do you think they're best employed in a Greyhawk campaign?
Oh, I think they're integral to the setting. I mean, I can't imagine Greyhawk without demons any more than I could imagine it without, humans or elves, really.
Right.
So um, I just see them as one of the primary sets of antagonists driving the entire setting from the ground up. And that probably ebbs and flows to some degree based on how people run their individual campaigns and stuff like that. But Gygax's vision of demonic interference in Greyhawk was always hugely compelling to me, and it It never, kind of, I mean, there was a whole lot of focus in the Gord stories on the other forces of evil allied against the demons.
Right.
So, the devils and the daemons and demodans and all the rest. Um, but they were never as compelling to me creatively as demons are. I don't know why. I mean,
I
I
agree.
like interesting things about the hells or the demons and such as
Mhm.
well, but I can like, just spend time playing with demons forever.
I give the Daemons a little bit of a pass because in the Gore the Rogue novels, Anthraxis played such a huge part of it.
Mhm.
I or the Oina Daemon, I should say. Uh,
Sure.
I kind of felt like that gave them a certain legitimacy that maybe some of the Demodans and things like that perhaps didn't have in my eyes. For those of you out there who are watching us that are members of my Patreon, we're talking about the Gore the Rogue novel right now. One of the things, the monster of the month this year is the Catabaline Demon from the Core the Rogue novels. So you guys will get a chance to see that. And Alan, I know that doing some research on Catabalines, I noticed that you have a your own write up on how the Catabaline looked. And
I
I did
do.
some research on your take on that, and it informed a little bit of what I did too. So, thank you for that contribution. You'll notice in some of the Patreon materials that I gave you that you'll see some of what you did reflected in it. I hope.
Okay.
Now going back to the Demon Lords a little bit, we're talking about them. They're such interesting adversaries, and you can base entire campaigns around the Demon Lords and their different machinations and how they involve player characters. We've got entire source books, entire modules. Like Temple of Elemental Evil is a great example of a module that's almost entirely based around demons. Once you get out of the main part of the story. Really, the driving force behind it is Ugdamoy and Ayus and the demonic forces like that. Um, what? Tell me a little bit about your favorite demon lords, Alan, and why they're your favorites. Which ones do you really like,
Oh goodness.
and why?
I don't think I've met a demon lord I haven't liked, really, Carlos. um, Let me think. Well, let's see. I guess just because of the focus of the Giants Drow modules on Lolth, I don't use Lolth or leverage Lolth heavily usually in my games as much. And I definitely look to a broader, I guess, look at demons through a broader window from the Drow's point of view. So they're not only dedicated to Lolth. There's lots of Drow that worship lots of other demons in my games.
Hmm.
Um, but some of my favorites, I guess, include some figures that were not necessarily originally demons that I've made into demons over time. So in my sort of demonic cosmology for my version of the Greyhawk campaign, I've got a first generation of demons, and Demogorgon is a sort of like the top of the second generation of demons.
Okay.
So even Demogorgon's not as powerful as the first generation of demons. Um, but Tiamat, I made into a demon.
Oh, okay.
Instead
Very
of having
cool.
her be lawful evil, I made her chaotic evil. And dragons are spawned from her, and there's abyssal dragons and stuff. Um,
I think it's interesting that you made that tier of demons. Uh, you actually predated then what Wizards of the Coast did with the Oberiths, in a sense, because the Oberiths are supposed to be these demons like Dagon and Obox Ob and things like that that
okay.
existed, from the primal stuff of the Abyss, and essentially that's you did that before they did. And Alan, Lord Grendelwolf Gaetano, our great supporter and friend down there, she says, "Alan, you speak so well of demons. Under any contracts we should be aware of?"
I am not at liberty to say.
For myself, we were talking about favorite demon lords. Actually, my favorite demon lord is a character I visit, a demon lord I visit here and there, which is Frazer Blue. Actually,
Mm,
he's probably my favorite because, as I said, S4 was so formative to me. And when I was playing these games as a kid, you're reading through statistics, and the game is a lot about the math of it and things like that back then for me. I couldn't help but notice just how many hit points Frazer Blue had when I was a kid.
yeah,
And I
it's a
was like,
lot.
yeah, I was thinking to myself, this guy is a true badass. I need to learn about him. So I was reading about I think that started me down the path to liking him. And I love the fact that he was so reviled by all the other demon lords. Even the other demon lords didn't want him to get his rod back. I thought that was great. I thought that was I thought to myself, this is a guy that actually rivals Demogorgon for being how uh, powerful and terrifying he could be. Um, and again, he got the whole his whole start in S4, so I always really enjoyed using him to some degree.
So he's one of my favorites as well. And he's one of those demons who I promoted up to this first level, first generation demon. They're what I call the firstborn. So he was one. I had Abraxas be one. Um, let's see, who else? There were six that were demons, and then there were others that weren't demons that were similar figures. So I made Astaroth, the devil from the Nine Hells articles from Ed Greenwood, into one of these, figures. Tiamat was one.
Hmm.
Alrunes, who's a demon that I imported into my campaigns from my DM in college, Alan Rook. He had a very imaginative campaign that was very planar in nature. And Alrunes was basically the demonic, her portfolio would essentially be magic. So the
Okay.
equivalent of like a Bokob type figure, but demon in
Oh, very
nature.
cool.
So,
Now,
yeah.
going back to your take on Tiamat as a demon lord, uh, how does that inform dragon kind? Chromatic dragons in general, your reds and your greens. Should we imply from that there is a demonic heritage there?
So the way I sort of placed the genealogy, I guess, of the or heritage of the Dragon Con is that they all spawn eventually from Tiamat in the long run,
Okay.
but that she created a race of abyssal dragons. Those dragons eventually, some came to the prime and then evolved over time or devolved over time into the standard D&D dragons from there.
I see.
So all in theory, if you follow ascribe to Tiamat's creation myths of the universe, all dragons naturally come from her, but
Right.
there's probably others that aren't, native to
Would you
her and
then
the abyss.
place Bahamut to be like a Solar in the kind of cosmology?
So he would be, and that's part of the reason I made her chaotic evil, was to make her the antithesis to Bahamut, who remains lawful good.
Right.
So he's still a dragon as well, and then he obviously has a counterclaim to the origin of dragons from hers. Not all dragons, in his mind, version of reality would be obviously spawned from her evil. So,
Okay. Well,
but I like the way that in particular in some of the early Greek myths and stuff. The gods can have these good and evil relationships together, and that's just the way gods work. It's different than the limited conception of good and evil that humans and mortals have.
right.
So it could well be that maybe Bahamut and Tiamat together spawned all the dragons, but
Uh,
maybe they don't tell the story that way anymore.
yeah, exactly. There's a if you look, I kind of see a tie in what you're doing in Vecna's extended history, where with the serpent and the light and darkness, uh, there may be something there a little bit because I could kind of see almost the light serpent as being Bahamut and the dark serpent being Tiamat, and there being some kind of alchemical, uh, I don't know, but
Yeah,
I
the
think that,
chemical wedding or something.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
alchemical wedding there going on. I think there's something interesting going on there, but that 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 it's very cool fodder for thought for me. I'd like to investigate that maybe a little bit deeper in one of my own projects. So thank you for that.
Oh, sure.
Going back to the Demon Lords again, one of my favorites also is Grazit.
Mm.
Grazit has a great history in the world of Greyhawk. Grazit has he's directly influenced Iggwilv, of course, and events on Earth, and he's done a lot with the Gord the Rogue novels. Alan, in your opinion, with the demon lords in the world of Greyhawk in specific. Uh, how do you feel like? I mean, we've seen their influence all over the place, but who do you feel like influences besides Ayu's perhaps the most on Orth, and what do you think? How do you feel like that's been portrayed in throughout the history of the setting?
Well, I would say probably in the terms of the publishing history, the setting Grotz would probably have to be the top
Hmm.
of the list. So I mean, he's just everywhere, and even if he did nothing except create, um, EAs, um, I don't know that you wouldn't name him the top for just doing that,
Right.
doing nothing else,
Yeah.
But with Gygax spent so much time building him up as an interesting character in the Gord novels that there's a lot of rich detail and history to him, the kinds of demons that serve him, sort of his mores and stuff that you don't get in a lot of the rest of the demons are kind of much more sort of very lightly detailed. So I really like that focus. And um, there's a really great story hour for some gaming fiction built out of third edition campaigning up on EN World, written by a guy by the name of Sepulcrave. And he spent a lot of time and effort focusing on these high level characters and their battle against Grotz over time. And
Okay.
he puts a lot of emphasis into Grotz and then in some to Senile a little bit later in that storyline. And he's got a whole ton of stat crunchy stuff for it all too. But it
That's
was really, really well
I've
done.
never
And that
even seen
influenced a
that,
lot of
so
my take.
I'd like to. I've never even seen that myself, so that's something I'm going to have to
Oh,
research after our discussion's over
I'll
with.
find a link and put it in the chat because it's probably the best gaming fiction I've ever read for anything.
Ooh, that's high
Sep
praise.
Sep is a great writer. The fact that he happens to write D&D grounded demon fiction is just gravy. But he's a
Hmm.
fabulous writer.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's definitely something I think everybody in the chat would want to see. Um, with regard to the demons and the flight of fiends, all right, there without going too deep into whether people approve of what Carl Sargent's material was like in second edition or his legacy to the game, how do you feel about the Flight of Fiends taking most of the demons out of Orth? Do you feel like that was a good move, a bad move, or a lateral move? What do you make of that?
Oh, I think it's a fun move.
Hmm.
So from a game point of view, I think having something like that come down and change the landscape in your campaign, if you are going to follow along with what they were publishing, gives you a lot of toys to play with. I
It
mean,
does.
you get to introduce some artifacts into the game and the environment and what happens to those artifacts after the Flight of Fiends is done. And obviously the demons weren't gone completely.
Right.
So how did some survive and or remain, but others didn't, and why? And then you can kind of go down the rabbit hole of, well, yeah, okay, so maybe if if Hazen got the crook from Drax, did he cut a deal with Drax and not banish his guys? You know?
Yeah, that was. Yeah, that the whole thing between Drax and Canon Hazen is right up there with me of like how Nyron sponsored the kidnapping of Prince Thrommel.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
it's
Yep.
like that bowls me over to this day when I think about it. That talk about strange bedfellows in the history of the game,
Yep.
and it makes you wonder exactly how these deals got cut and what was the price that was paid for them.
Yeah, and what are the layers behind the layers that are driving these kinds of decisions and actions?
And I would say that that speaks again to the strength of Greyhawk in that the setting is so loose, as opposed to Forgotten Realms where we know all these things and there's really no mystery. Something like that it's one of those unsolved cases that allows a DM to fill in blanks and things like that with so much own material for their own personal campaign.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, and there's a lot of room with these kinds of changes to create your own interpretation or meaning for these events. And
Mhm.
just because it says X in the published material doesn't mean you can't change everything that happens behind the surface and give that veneer a completely different meaning than
Right.
what's really been done with the setting, officially.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now we talked about Grazit a little bit. Now, obviously, you can't really talk about Grazit without talking about Iggwilv. And given her background, I mean, she's one of the most important characters in the history of Dungeons and Dragons, really, and certainly in the Greyhawk campaign. She's got immensely staggering power. She's possibly one of the most powerful mages ever to have been born on Earth. Um, she could very well be the child of the Baba Yaga. I mean, talking about lineage.
Or
Um,
she could be Baba
she
Yaga.
could be Baba Yaga for all we know.
Yeah.
You're right. Could you, you know, why do we love Iggwilv? Alan, what makes her such a compelling character to you?
I think she has sort of some of those classic elements of fantasy and epic literature in general that give you great hooks to play with her. So she's hugely powerful. She conquers an entire region of Greyhawk for 10 years and loots it, and probably sacrifices half the population to
Right.
demons or
One of the
whatever.
most martial, one of the most martial populations in the Flyness too, I might add.
Exactly, yeah. So it's not a tiny accomplishment. It's not like
No.
you're knocking over Walworth County.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
Um, and then so she's immensely accomplished. And then in the height of her power and hubris, she conjures and captures Grotz, and that seals her fate and downfall. Now, whether that's when Iaz gets created or it's before, you
Uh-huh.
got lots of room to play with that. But then,
Right.
she falls from power, and then she's able to use what's left to sort of finish hiding away the caverns and her daughter and these other things that are important to her, and then kind of fades away.
Right.
Or does she? Was that all a ploy or a ruse?
Right, exactly, exactly. I mean, if you read things like Return to the Eight afterwards, or if you read
Exactly.
the Savage Tide Adventure Path, I mean, Iggwilv has, or Isle of the Ape, we share certainly her presence. She has not lost interest in Earth or in meddling in the affairs of men. Um, I'd like to talk a little bit about what we actually know about Iggwilv, though. There's a lot of stuff out there that is speculation about her, like whether or not her ties to Baba Yaga, or whether or not, is she Baba Yaga, things like that. What do we actually know about the Witch Queen of Perenland that is fact?
Not a lot, really. Depending on how you kind of interpret the timing of the publication history, you can really change and warp Iggwilv around and the location of her lair or lairs in Greyhawk pretty substantially.
Right,
So when Sajkanth was originally published in '76 as a tournament for Metro Detroit gamers, it was called The Lost Caverns of Sajkanth with an O.
right,
And in that, Iggwilv is described as a male, not as a female.
right.
So was she shape changing? Does she regularly change her sex at times to achieve different ends? Or was that, a typo or something like Gary later
Right.
said? Well, you
Exactly.
can play with it in lots of ways. But but even there, the location of her caverns is not up in the Yaddle Mountains, but it's more in the Hell Furnaces area
Hmm.
and the Crystal Mists because it's adjacent to the Sea of Dust.
Right.
And that's because when Greyhawk, that was before the Greyhawk setting had been drawn by Darlene, and it's based off the old Domesday Book campaign maps.
Right.
Um,
Exactly. I
so
think,
there's a lot of mutability there. I mean, you can kind of do anything you want with her.
and that's really the reason I asked this particular question, is I wanted it to be a kind of a lead into this, in that Iggwilv has managed to become one of the most popular, most enduring villains in Greyhawk history, and we basically know nothing about her. Everything we know about her is speculation, and I think that that's crazy cool. In that, it offers a DM so much latitude in the way that they can employ her in their campaigns, in the way that, you can stumble across pieces of her past that are horrifically campaign altering and yet don't contradict anything in published materials. I think that that is I think that is, to me, is what's most compelling about her, is that she's this huge enigma, yet everybody loves her so much. It's
It's
crazy.
it's it's like Vecna in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
If you look at what we really know about Vecna in terms of the first edition context, it's really just the hand and eye description in the Sword of Cast from the Dungeon Master's Guide,
exactly.
and it
Exactly.
just gives you so much to play with.
Now, in your particular campaign, Alan, and I know you do a lot of, as a huge fan of the character, I've actually played in your extended Lost Caverns
Which I'm going to be running
adventure.
at GaryCon again this year.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Yeah,
interesting to
yeah.
know. So you're going to make me cut. I'm running 7 games at GaryCon. You're going to make me cut a hole in my schedule to play in that. That's nice.
Well, it's going to be on Saturday night, I think, is where it's scheduled.
Oh,
So,
fantastic! I can't wait. But tell me about how you like to employ Iggwilv in both a convention context and in the context of a home campaign. What ways do you actually introduce her into the game?
well, I think in a convention game, you have a little bit more latitude to kind of pull the stops out with things.
Right.
There was definitely the possibility, depending on what the characters do in the what I call the warped caverns of Sajkanth or Sajkanth, depending on what vowel I decide to use from year to year. Um, that you could, meet her and fight her for, a couple rounds.
Thank God that never happened in our game.
um, but I think, like a lot of these really great Greyhawk villains, and this is more reflective of how she's used sort of literarily in the Return of the Eight module. She's a great behind the scenes figure, moving and shaking stuff in the background where, um, you know, the characters aren't going to confront her directly. It's kind of like Kaiser Soze. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know somebody who did work for Iggwilv, kind of thing.
Right, right, absolutely.
Um,
And by the way, I would also say I would put Return of the Eight as I would submit that as possibly the greatest second edition module ever written.
oh yeah, it's definitely my favorite. I mean, the especially for the second edition Greyhawk stuff. That
Yes.
The only one I might consider kind of in the same league as that would maybe be the Star Cairns adventure, which I have a strong like for it as well.
I
But I
I
still think Return of the Eight, it just creates this fabulous setting
I
in
have a bad
the
feeling taste in my mouth for Star Carrions because of the two sequels.
yeah, yeah,
Lysandrin
yeah,
was
yeah,
terrible. Doomgrinder was absolutely
yeah.
abysmal.
Doom Grinder was a waste of what could have been a really cool
Yeah.
adventure.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, absolutely. Return of the Eight was such a great, and I think you're right when you talk about the way to employ her as a behind the scenes villain. First of all, if you're going to actually meet Iggwilv, your power level as a PC is going to be extremely high. So your opportunity to use her in a direct fashion is probably pretty slim. I mean, she could actually be a patron for campaign for characters in a sense. I mean, if you're creative, but if you're going to make her an antagonist, an actual and run characters to fight her, as you said, for a couple rounds, the power level you're dealing with is staggering. So that there's a very slim window of opportunity. I agree with you that she works best as a behind the scenes villain. Um, what kind of stuff has she
Yeah,
done in your campaign actually to influence your own campaign?
well, so one of the things I haven't run as a campaign yet that I would like to someday is to take all this sort of layered demonic cosmology I've used or created over the years on top of the D&D stuff, where the players play up and coming demons in the abyss, and they're basically researching and learning about these older generations of demons and capabilities, and so they would be sort of the equivalent, probably starting out of like 10th 11th level characters, and eventually maybe they'd progress to become more powerful and stuff. And I think it would be really cool to have that something like that where the players were playing these very powerful demons that would then at some point perhaps go toe to toe with Iggwilv.
Can you even
So,
imagine the talk about your backstabbing and treachery on a Game of Thrones level? I mean, that's beyond belief, and that is the kind of game that could only come from your twisted mind, Alan.
oh, I'm sure not just mine.
I love it, man. I love it. Uh, By the way, out there in the audience, for everyone that's watching right now, if you'd like to ask any questions of Alan or I when it comes to the Witch Queen or of about demons, go ahead and ask your questions there in the chat. We'll probably have some time here at the end to discuss some things that you might be interested in learning. As I said, Alan's a wealth of information about the World of Greyhawk campaign and in Iggwilv and demons. So,
So
and as
beyond what you've done in your When Comes the Witching Hour adventure specifically, Carlos, how else have you used her in your games? Because I know you love her at least as much as I do,
I
if
do
not
love
potentially
Iggwilv.
more.
I do love Iggwilv. Actually, in my game, as a player when I was coming up, I gamed extensively in Perrinland. That was my stomping grounds. So we would constantly hear about Iggwilv in the background. It was always these hushed whispers, and we would come across these places where people were walking around in this whole melancholy had settled over the town because of what had happened 100 years ago through Iggwilv. And so she became the boogeyman to our characters. Uh, and I had a very healthy fear and respect of her as a player character going through all these things where it was like, oh yeah, Iggwilv must have been here at one point in time. And you would be,
Mm.
everybody just kind of look at each other, furtive glances around the table.
You
So we
sort
were
of
all
see the
terrified
wake
of
of
her.
her passing and the destruction around the area.
Exactly. Or it was even the thing that the more horrifying thing for us was always we would walk into into town and all the old people would have this 1,000 yard stare. You know, where it was they would just look right through you and just walk around because of the horrors that had happened in their homeland that they'd gone through, and it was or their mothers and fathers had gone through, and her influence was still being felt a century later. So that
Wow.
informed me as a DM that experience profoundly. And what I do when it comes to Witching Hour, um, the player characters, the thesis of the campaign of the game is actually the player characters are the mother of Ariana Silverfox. If you remember, the famous Silverfox family of Greyhawk has lost her daughter, and it happened about a century or about 50 years ago. And she's old now, but she's never stopped looking after her daughter because she disappeared in the depths of Castle Greyhawk. Well, she has found out through she's been using the Silverhawk family fortune for years to try and cast divination, hire diviners and things like that to find her daughter. Well, she finally got a lead, and it's in Northern Perrinland. So she's stunned by this revelation to begin with, but she sends up player characters in Northern Perrinland to figure it out. Well, the whole hook behind the module is that Iggwilv, when she was studying under Zagig, had planned to betray him from nearly the very beginning. And she used the notion that in the depths of Castle Greyhawk, there were a lot of extraplanar portals and things like that. She built basically an escape hatch to go to Perrinland back and forth. Her plan
Ah.
was that in the future, after she betrayed Zagig, if she failed, what she was going to do is she was going to conjure a horde of demons, go back through her portal, and take over the whole place. Well, what ended up happening was when Ariana Silverfox and her butler and her whole coterie of fellow adventurers, they got lost in Castle Greyhawk. They found the portal. They were
Mm.
trapped by spectral trolls in this room. They knew they were going to die. So she says, I'm going through this portal regardless. So she went through the portal with her butler, got trapped in one of Iggwilv's old bolt holes in Perrinland. Now that she's out of Castle Greyhawk and the anti divination spells aren't in place anymore, all of a sudden they can find out where she is. So now she's in this place in Perrinland, and the player characters have to go in there. Well, the problem is that it's not as uninhabited by demons as the Lost Caverns of Soghanth was. There are several singular demons, named demons of that don't conform to Monster Manual
Mm.
statistics or anything like that. Like, for example, I have one called the Stargazer. The Stargazer is a Merilith that was studying under Iggwilv, and she had found through astrology and astronomy some of the very underpinnings of the universe. And so what she did is she goes into this room, and the whole room is entirely black and silent because her these secrets of the universe have driven her insane, and she can no longer bear light. She can no longer bear sound. The void of the space is all that can console her. But she has in the back room this entire equation that is like 100 yards tall and wide in chalk that she's written across the board. And if player characters should behold this equation, it has the chance either to give them a permanent special ability, but more likely it will drive her as insane as they are. But as the Stargazer is. But the problem is, if the player characters walk into this room and see the Stargazer and let light in and sound, she just flies into a rage. And during playtesting, the player characters did exactly this, and
Oh, of course.
she murdered about 12 of their henchmen in one round. It was horrific what ended up happening.
Sounds awesome.
Oh, thank you very much. Alan is going to be one of the first people who gets actually a sneak peek at this when it comes to Witching Hour because one of my ways of thanking him for this was I gave him a PDF of the module, um, and so you'll get a chance to see it for yourself, as will all my patrons pretty soon. So,
And
but
I assume at GaryCon we will have copies available for sale at the booth.
absolutely, absolutely. You
Yeah.
will have copies. One of the things that Black Blade is my relationship with Alan. We actually Castle Entertainment. We sell some of our wares through Black Blade Publishing. So when you're at North Texas or you're at GaryCon, if you stop at the booth, you'll have a chance to see some of our modules there. So that's really cool. But Alan, going back to Witching Hour, I do a lot of stuff like that with the demons, and as the player characters go deeper and deeper through the module, one of the places they find is they find the Witch Queen's bedroom, and on her dresser, when they go in there, is a mortar and pestle. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to say exactly what it is, but I think people who are scholars of the setting may have an idea what that is. Alan, I can see by the smile on your face that you know for certain, and now you know my opinion of what Iggwilv's origins truly are.
Right, right.
I notice over here on the side, Will from Wicked Studios. What kind of connections are there between Iggwilv and other major NPCs in Greyhawk?
Oh,
And
that's a
he
great
also says he's
question.
looking forward to picking up one at the Black Blade booth. Thanks so much, Will. You guys' support out there means the world to me. It allows me to follow my dream, and I really, really appreciate it. Go ahead, Alan. Go ahead and field that one.
Oh, I think again, I think it can really kind of vary depending on how you want to use her in your game. So I kind of treat Greyhawk campaigns as episodic radio dramas, in that one campaign doesn't necessarily have to flow into the next one over time. So
Mm.
in one campaign, the characters might defeat Grotz, and then Grotz might be a central figure in the campaign 2 or 3 times later or whatever. So in that sense, I think it gives you a lot of opportunity to take Iggwilv and play with her in lots of different ways. But in terms of some of what you were talking about earlier about the history of the character, I don't use the Iggwilv as a student of Zagig at all
Oh, okay.
in most of my conceptions of her. Um, and if anything, I figure she's older than Zagig and probably is, if anything, maybe the reverse is more the case, where he might have been apprenticed
Ooh,
to her.
that's interesting.
So, but I think in terms of her relationship to like contemporary NPCs during the campaign, it would really depend on how you want to set up your power structures and things, because she's so powerful and has so much influence potentially at her disposal that she could topple a nation or something like that without probably too much undue difficulty. So it really depends on what kind of um, focus you're setting her up for the role in the campaign in general. Somebody like Mordenkainen would obviously be a great person to have some relationship with her, but maybe Iggwilv's the one who brokered the deal between Hazen
Oh.
and Drax. What kind of finder's fee would she require to make something like that happen?
Maybe, given her background in Savage Tide, she did it strictly to infuriate Demogorgon.
Yeah.
She said, she decided she would just do it. Remember, we were talking about a chaotic evil personage here. Her motivations could be anything, really.
Absolutely. And people like that hold grudges for centuries. So,
Hmm.
maybe she's getting revenge for something from hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Going to Will's question again, a little more directly, we know that because she was a driving force between Return of the Eight to some degree, her background. She has a history with Jalarzi as a result, and with Warren Starcoat, um, who have sponsored the player characters, or at least been a huge part of it. Their travel to one of her bolt holes on Luna, we know that, so that we can bring them into there. Mariel as well was involved in that. Anybody that
Mm,
has had anything to do with IUs has been touched directly by Iggwilv. Anybody that has done anything in Perrinland has been touched by Iggwilv. Um,
sure.
so we've
Tensor certainly was, a
Mhm.
victim of her
Oh yeah, I
machinations.
don't know how I
Yeah.
forgot Tensor in that. Yeah, but we've got she's got her fingers in so many pies. It's beyond belief. You could actually attach her to literally anyone who's had any contact with demon kind.
Yeah.
So the way that she can be employed is, as you said, Alan, myriad and varied. But those particular characters right there, circle of eight characters, and people in Perrinland and to the Wolf Nomads, I would imagine to some degree,
Mhm.
she has had direct and very, very direct influence in. So that's a great question, and I think it's part of why I love Iggwilv. You're talking about a character here who's had so much influence, and I love the Circle of Eight as such a formative group. They're some of the greatest, most well known characters in the entire Greyhawk campaign. So any character that's had influence on them instantly, you've got an interest in. So that's
Yeah. And you can even take it backward as well. If you take Sajkant and turn that into a person, perhaps instead of a place, you could have some sort of relationship there, or with Dowd, perhaps.
oh yeah. Our
And
friend,
the
our good friend and patron, Tommy John Kelly, has been doing some amazing, amazing work on Iggwilv and her relation to Dowd over in the McClunish lands. He's doing a bunch of fiction on her that's just really, really compelling stuff. And I encourage anyone who is got an interest in Iggwilv to check that out, because he is also an excellent, excellent writer, and I think he's very faithful to the kind of feel of the character that that we've all loved so much. And also, we forgot
yeah,
about Baba Yaga. I mean, Baba Yaga, depending on what you think, she could be the daughter of Baba Yaga. She could be Baba Yaga. So, yeah, like Alan said, a million different ways, a million different characters. So, um, Alan, is there? I see that we're running against the time here. 8:58 right now as we speak Eastern time. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing about Iggwilv or about demons?
oh goodness. Uh, Never mess with a demon lord's amulet.
The one thing I will say in closing, and I address this in my Patreon materials, is when you're in fighting a demon, uh, the very first thing you should know is this: you'd better have surprise, and you'd better kill it in the first round, because if you don't, it has two abilities that are going to completely undermine your game and probably your lives as characters. Number one being gate, and number two being teleport without error. It's going to
Yeah.
teleport without error away from you right away. It's going to call in reinforcements, and it's going to kill you and all of your friends. So you'd better be ready right there with some way to mitigate that, or some way to, or you better kill it right away. Because if a demon is being played intelligently by your dungeon master, you have very, very little chance if you don't handle it immediately.
Yeah, if it's a smart demon and it's got good spell casting abilities, it's gonna wreak lots and lots of havoc. I ascribe to the idea that demons and other such creatures can use their at will powers in addition to their melee attacks every round.
Yeah,
They're at will, therefore they are the speed of thought and they win initiative unless
right.
you can think faster than them.
Correct.
So
And when you're talking about a very intelligent demon, like a type 4, like an alpha Shanae, if you prefer that,
yeah.
yeah, you're not going to outthink it, generally speaking. So again, you better have surprise, and you better kill it in one round,
Yeah.
because otherwise it's gonna be a meat grinder. And I addressed that in my Patreon materials this month when I in at length in my which everybody here will be receiving tomorrow. That's a patron. Alan's got a little bit of a sneak preview into it, and I have actually released a spell that is a way to mitigate the gate ability.
Ah,
So, and then we will also be with Castle Entertainment. We're also releasing a contest in the locked gate spell. There is art contributed by our good friend Mike Lowe, who did the wonderful drawing of Marquesa that is in the back of the hardback Scourge of the Slave Lords book. If anyone can identify the TSR module that the demon mentioned and drawn in that spell is, if they can mention what module that demon came from, they're going to get a special prize, which will be in an upcoming Castle Entertainment module. You will be able to take any NPC that you wish from your history, and we will work together and put them in the module. So you'll get to have an appearance in an upcoming Castle Entertainment module, which I hope is compelling a prize enough for everybody to want to take part in. So, Alan, we're going to sign off for the evening. Thank you so much for being a part of this, my man. I learned a lot, and
uh,
I've got some links for myself to check out. As always, you're a wealth of information. I love having you around. Just for I learn so much from the game every time we speak.
well, thanks, Carlos. It was a pleasure to be here and to chat with some friends, new and old, in the chat. And I certainly look forward to continuing the conversation.
Absolutely. Stick around for just a second so I can say goodbye once we sign off. But this is the end of the first episode of caslTawk. Be sure everybody on the Facebook and on the Twitch and on YouTube to let me know what you thought of our episode. If there's anything you'd like to see more or less, or any guests upcoming that you'd like me to try and land, be sure to do what I can. On behalf of Allan Grohe, I'm Carlos Lising, and thanks for tuning in. Have a good evening.
Bye.